third panel of the Kikao Junction under the Queer Organizing conversation in Kenya. I am glad to be your host and moderator for this session again. My name is Stephen Okwany. I work with Talanta Africa as the Director of Programs. Talanta Africa is a queer activist collective where we use the power of innovative and strategic communication products such as arts, media, culture, and tech to really amplify queer voices in governance, healthcare, and decision-making spaces. In this conversation, this time around, we're going to have a broader discussion around issues to do with unmasking impediments in culture, law, and religion around queer organizing in Kenya. And as part of this conversation, I'm joined by a very, very awesome panel that constitutes of Africa, who is the lead at the Kisumu Feminist Society. We are also joined by Paulie Kapoor. Paulie Kapoor is the Executive Director of China's organization. We are also joined by Ivy Warimba. Ivy Warimba is a technical person here. Hata sitamintroduce, atakuwa na time yake. And also joined by the lovely Kennedy Abbott. Kennedy Abbott works at the support office for the executive director at Uhai Ishri, where Ishri is basically the indigenous organizing and grant maker, supporting works around queer organizing, sex work organizing in East and East Central, and I think it's also in Southern Africa. But Kennedy Abbott will have a chance to really talk in depth around that. Just to remind us, our online participant, that this conversation is brought to us courtesy of a partnership between us, Talanta Africa, and ForumCiv under the Kikao Junction series, which is a platform for us to really have conversation around issues that are pertinent to queer organizing in Kenya, and also just to bring queer voices back to the active organizing that had been there before. Without wasting much time, I want to at least allow each and every panelist to introduce themselves in depth, and I'll start with Ivy Warimba. Over to you, Ivy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ivy Warimba. I currently work with GALC, which is the Gay and Lesbian Coalition of Kenya. I am the Communication and Advocacy Officer. I have an interest in communication and the role that this plays in the society and how we can make change through communication. Yeah, that's who I am. I'm happy to be here, happy to meet all of the other panelists, and I'm excited for what's coming up.
Thank you very much, Ivy. We're also joined by the lovely Paulie Kapoor. Paulie, you can have the floor to introduce yourself, your organization, and the work you do.
My name is Paulie Kapoor. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Kisumu China's community-based. Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please proceed.
Yeah, my name is Paulie Kapoor. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Kisumu China's community-based organization, which is a GBMSM and male sex worker-led organization in Kisumu County. Nice to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Paulie, for that introduction. I'll welcome Africa to introduce us. Proceed.
Okay. Hi, guys. My name is Africa. I am the director of Kisumu Feminist Society. And today I think I'm just excited to talk to you about everything feminism. And I'm really interested to see how this conversation plays out. Yeah.
Thank you. And now to Kennedy Board. Proceed.
Good morning for all those who are watching and following this conversation from abroad. Ken Abbott from Ohio. I work with the Ohio, which is the Eastern African Sexual Health and Rights Initiative. Maybe just to correct you, we don't have a presence in Southern Africa, but we have very firm partners because some of our programs are regional. Some of our programs are, because we work a lot with partners who work in Africa. But we work generally in 7 countries of Eastern Africa, that is Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, and the DRC. We work with gender and sexual minorities in shifting landscapes that then allows for everyone to fully enjoy and live, with bodily autonomy and respect. And I'm happy to be here. There's no author and generator of knowledge. We'll be learning and having these conversations together. So happy to learn from you and happy to have this conversation. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Kennedy, for the introduction. And at this point, again, I just want to remind us that our discussion point today is unmasking impediments in law, cultures, religion, and law, culture, and religion around queer organizing in Kenya. And we've had series of conversations before looking at queer organizing in Kenya since late 2007 to date. And of course, we've realized that we've had some quick wins, we've had some challenges, we've celebrated, we've cried, we've vented, as a movement, we've seen the better side of it, we've seen the worst side of it. But just to delve into the conversation directly, I just want to start us off with a question to Ivy Werimba. Sorry, Ivy, I think your name is just so much on my lips. You'll pardon me. But just to start us off, I want to ask Ivy, now that GALC is one of the oldest, actually, I think one of the oldest queer organizing in Kenya. Now, GALC has been organizing for some time now. Are we making headways in shifting attitudes and perception around queer rights since those times to date?
Okay, it's okay. I was prepared to start. I don't mind. So yes, my answer to that question is yes. A lot of change has happened since when GALC was initiated. I have been part of this community from 2013, which was around the time when GALC was coming back, as there was a new team and it was called GALC Reloaded. And so since then, since 2013, all the way now to 2021, a lot has happened. A few examples is I talk about how we live in a country that's heavily influenced by religious fundamentalists. And it might sound a bit opposite talking about change for the queer community, and at the same time we have religious fundamentalists, but it's true. The change has been slow, but it has been happening. And evidence of that is what happened in 2019. The fact that we were able to come together as a community to be able to push for our own rights, for the decriminalization of same-sex relationships, for us to get audience from the Kenyan. There's an echo that's distracting me somewhere.
Oh, sorry.
So yes, the fact that we were able to get audience with the Kenyan courts was amazing, and it was also we were able to see how far we've been able to come as organizers within this society. I will also talk about how Rafiki was also, for the shortest period, that was a movie that was able to be broadcast in our country, in a country that criminalizes same-sex relationships. And we've also seen amazing work done by different organizations that have done trainings to police, to people in the transport section, also convening with parliamentarians to be able to push further these conversations. So while it's slow, it's going far. And one of the most recent things, like what happened with the I Am Samuel ban, in previous times, that kind of ban wouldn't have garnered as much attention as it did. Now, because people are unafraid to come out and be seen and be heard, it is evidence of how far attitudes are changing, perceptions around queerness, how that is changing.
Talking about I Am Samuel and looking at also what happened to Rafiki at the times of Ezekiel Mutua. And it was perceived that now with the exit of Ezekiel Mutua at the Kenya Film Classification Board, there could be some level of awareness, level of consciousness in terms of upholding a text that speak to queer, like that speak to the queer narrative. So what will you make of the current ban on I Am Samuel in reference to exit of Ezekiel Mutua? Is it like we are inheriting behaviors and characters, or okay, please proceed.
From my point of view, what I'd say is that Ezekiel Mutua didn't exist in a bubble. He was a representation of a lot more people. For someone to be able to have that much power, he's not acting out of his own accord. Like, yes, of course, he has to act to be able for the things to be done as the CEO of this organization, but he's emboldened by the fact that he's supported by other people. And him leaving was one, it was a shame. Like, someone who has been preaching morality to us was also removed from his office out of allegations for corruption. And so I'd say that what is happening now is we are seeing that he wasn't acting as a one-man. It wasn't a one-man show. There are more people who are out there. There are even jokes right now on social media where people are saying that that the Kenyan Film Classification Board should change its name to Kenyan Film Christianity Board, which is funny when you think about it, but it also talks about a larger system that is corrupt within itself. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think Africa will want to make a rejoinder to that. Africa, how is the system? How is the system acting up? How is the system contributing to this kind of status quo?
Sorry, I was on mute. So let me see. I think all of you can hear me. So when you talk about the status quo, are you actually asking about what happened in the light of I Am Samuel being banned? Is that what you're asking?
And also just, yes.
Okay, so I actually agree with what Ivy has said. I feel like Ezekiel Mutua was a representation of a much larger issue that a lot of people do not talk about. And in this instance, the issue is the system. The system is corrupt. The system is homophobic. The system is the one that constantly allows the dehumanization of queer bodies, of female bodies, of women, trans people, and gender non-conforming people. So, you know, when Ezekiel Mutua was fired, a lot of people are happy because they thought the things that have been happening, you know, during the time Rafiki was banned would be able to create more awareness, not knowing that the system, which is, you know, like the patriarchal, like, you know, capitalist system that we exist in, keeps on bringing out the same products, the same people with the same mindsets. And that is why I am sure the banning of I Am Samuel was like a shock to a lot of people, because we actually assumed that there would be a level of awareness, not knowing that, you know, the same structures that enable this dehumanization continue to exist. So I actually agree with what, you know, like they're saying, where they're like saying Ezekiel Mutua is a representation of a much bigger issue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. But do you want to make a rejoinder to that?
Definitely. I think there's some noise in our background, so I'll be muting myself every other time I'm not speaking. Yeah, but yeah, I think there are greater issues that faces, and like, sorry. the greater issues that faces, and these issues sort of most of the time we find ourselves organizing, in a place assuming that there's progress, but then whatever we saw in the courts with Repeal 162, whatever we've seen with Kenya Film and Classification Board, and every other time conversations that are happening online and in virtual spaces, you could actually read the mood and the attitudes of a majority of Kenyans. And when we have a political system that listens and it gives so much attention to a lot of the silent right wing, who also are political players, and there are a myriad of silent other actors who are either hangers on, but for one reason or the other play a key part in informing political decisions and directions in this country. We need to sort of have a programming that thinks outside the box, and maybe later on we're going to be having a deeper conversation around why we need to think differently, and by thinking differently we think about opposition monitoring. But for now, maybe I'll just amplify the concerns and the feedback that has been shared by both Africa and I'm forgetting the representative from GALG, that there is greater need. There's greater need to think and strategize around, shifting the landscape, and those strategies and how we define some of those processes should be from a place of we're still not there. I'm a political reader, and there's this book with this beautiful title, Not Yet Uhuru. Yeah. So for me, I think even in the LGBT movement and the queer organizing in Kenya, we are not yet there. We have made very good strides, with the transgender education and advocacy registration, with the registration of the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, and with the change of identity cards, and the right names to be and gender markers to be in those documents. But I feel we are just beginning to be there, because even in terms of support, some of our programs, it's not very African. You can actually see most of the supporters of the programs that push for change, that is liberal, are not African sort of initiated, are not African supported extensively. We don't have individual supporters from Africa. Yeah. So I think there's still a lot to do, and there's still a lot that needs to happen so that our advocacy agendas and even our processes and how we lens things are coined in a place, and that place should be the place of we are still far from getting our ambitions achieved.
Oh, thank you very much about for the inclusions. It's always nice to just speak to our history from where we come from, and just to adjudicate where we are at and where we're going to in terms of the wins and the gains. Perhaps Paulie Kapoor, if you have a rejoinder before we jump to the next round. Well.
Yes, thanks, Okwan, for that. There are so many factors or determinants that attribute to that. And maybe if you look at the normative attitudes posed by these people within the system. So, like if you check the case of Ezekiel Mutua was not working alone. The system has so many people involved. And when we look at the social and gender norms, the attitude within the system, then it contributes to this a lot. Most people are still naive, and they still believe that homosexuality is a behavior that is learned, and they are learned. I've been following about Ezekiel Mutua, and most of them are like, no, this is a behavior which can be learned. Many contributes to that. And when you look at the major determinant is the non-heterosexual orientation, which is a factor making it difficult for us to access services, social justice, and also other services like healthcare provision, among others. So it becomes very complex and it becomes very problematic as we push for inclusion. Why? Because of some of the laws, the written, the unspoken laws, let me call them the bad laws, which contribute a lot to this hate or the harm that is being caused to the LGBTI community. So there's much to be done in terms of sensitizing the community. I know much has been done, but much needs to be done because people's attitude, changing people's attitude, is another thing altogether. Not to you, Stephen.
Internet connectivity, but now I think I'll just delve into the next. What is the fear of organizing in terms of feminism? Are we making headway in terms of feminism? And what are the impediments to the consumption of rights among LGBTQ feminists? Over to you, Africa.
Sorry, my mic was on mute. I don't know what was happening. So I hope you can all hear me, if that's okay. Okay. So for me, I interpreted the question as what are the limitations for feminism in the current LGBTQ organizing? And I just want to say that feminism as a concept in LGBTQ organizing is a relatively new thing that hasn't been happening for the longest time. In as much as I believe our actions, our beliefs, and everything that we do have been feminist from the word go, regardless of whether we could put a name on feminism or not. Actively organizing around feminism for LGBTQ people is very new, and it's something that was met with a lot of backlash because people assume that since we are part of the larger LGBTI community, we are supposed to be together, work together, yay, siblinghood all the time. So when LGBTQ women expressed a need for having a space that was tailored for them and catered to their needs, a lot of people are asking questions, why do you want to organize on your own? Ni nini mko nao that sisi hatuna? Not knowing that things like patriarchy do not sleep, and the wider LGBT community is not an exception, because even for the longest time, LGBTQ people used to take a back seat when it came to having conversations and being represented and just having the issues talked about. So mostly the limitations for me, as I feel, have been one, lack of adequate resources to consistent funding, because like I'd said before, feminism as a concept is new in LGBTQ organizing. So you find that even us who are resource mobilizing, we constantly have to justify why we need to have these spaces. Yeah, even if everyone can see the importance of this space, but we constantly have to justify why we need to have these spaces. And then also just continuous I don't want to call it backlash, because I don't want to sound confrontational and stuff, but I can say lack of support from the wider LGBTI community, where I feel like the moment feminist organizing in LGBTQ spaces started, most of us were othered. We were treated like, okay, mmedecide kwenda side yenu, sisi pia wacha tufanye vitu zetu. So it came to a point where even being represented in events and organizing that had the wider LGBTI community wasn't even possible, because we were not getting that support that we wanted from the word go, due to the fact that we decided to come up with spaces that tailored for us. So for me, like I said before, the limitations, I feel like inadequate funding, lack of resources, because we have to justify ourselves to donors every single time, and also lack of support from the wider LGBTI community. People still can't wrap their heads around the fact that LGBTQ people need their spaces, and it's very important. That's why the why question is always there. Why do you need to organize for yourself? Why do you need to be alone? Why LGBTQs and not the wider LGBTI community? So I feel I personally feel those are the limitations according to me.
We had some in-depth conversations yesterday around movement building, and part of the outcomes were the conversations around a specification of organizing, for example, in ITGNC, LBQ, GBMSM, and there was a comment that came up that now even bisexuals are also organizing. Are we polarizing ourselves extremely to the extreme ends? Perhaps, perhaps, perhaps Abort as a funder within the queer organizing, you could you could give it a shot.
I think that's where the opposition probably are sort of taking sort of a lead in their fight to sort of thwarten and to shut down and to fetter LGBT organizing in Kenya and probably in Africa, because then they're working from a concerted point. They're working as and galvanizing support from a united front as opposed to working in different segments. And maybe just to speak to the element of feminism, as I come back to the issue of polarization, it's not a very new concept. It's a concept that has been existed, but it's been amplified in let's say since 2010. When now the women movement and organizing became very vibrant and strong, and then finding what are they sort of underrepresented and how does marginalization present within the broader identity as of womanhood, right? And so within that broad ambit, then LBQ, then LGBT, individuals and organizations and ambitions then found a place to fall within that broader spectrum. There's a report that was released by Astria and Mamakash about last year, Vibrant Yet Under-Resourced, which depicted the different struggles that LBQ organizing, are going through, and how the organizing has moved, over time, and see the challenges that are facing. Why? Because you find that in a lot of the organizing and what informed the different institutions and the different voices of the identities within the collective LGBT, it was from the place of violence, it was a place of discrimination, it was from the place of rights. And then the epidemic of HIV in the 1990s, when it erupted, and the government, different governments, including the government of Kenya, then decided to declare it a national disaster. So different actors in different parts of the globe then decided and placed a dedicated sort of attention to funding and including providing technical support to then what we used to refer to as the high burdened population. We know the areas where we found HIV to be high burdened, and one of those areas was the key populations, what we call in the HIV term. And so from then, attention then moved from violence. Attention then moved from stigma and discrimination, and then it moved to an epidemic sort of length to how programming was shaped. And so sporadically you found LBQ organizing lagging behind in terms of support and in terms of capacity strengthening and just generally collectivizing, that is sort of guided by shared struggles, until very recently, when now women's spaces and philanthropic actors like Ohai and Astria and Mama Cash then decided to make this sort of a united fight to ensure that every segment of the collective LGBTIQ can be able to get and access and retain and claim their rights in the best way forward. And then over time, even when this now is happening, because now we have a segment of the population, organizing around an epidemic, right? Organizing around, pathology, for lack of a better word, it's not the best of terms. And then you have now feminism picking up in different corners of the globe, you know, and women's organizations and women's rights. And I'm not referring to broadly, generally, all women organizations, because there are even women, you know, organizations that are established within left-wing, you know, ideologies, right? And so they become part of the opposition. But I'm just talking about liberal feminists who found the intersectionalities within their struggles to include, you know, issues of LGBTQ rights. And so over time, you find that, you know, LGBTQ are organizing and, you know, gaining a lot of traction, and then GMT and MSM communities are also organizing and just gaining some traction in the context. But then the one part of the population that felt left out are the bisexual communities, you know, both within gay, cis men organizing, and, you know, LGBTQ organizing. So the bisexual identity then was sidelined from feminism and feminist concepts. And that's why we, you know, out of global conversations, the 23rd of September and the entire week became a bisexual identity week. So it's very right to say that polarization exists. But then let's also return this conversation to the roots of opposition and how opposition are becoming very tactful. Yeah. So it's also one of the you know, ways that the opposition are using to then, because the only way you can be able to quieten and to finish a movement is to mess with the leader, right? To terminate the leader or just remove them from that place by making them either look in, you know, not credible or some sort of a way, right? So because that was not happening, you know, in the speed that they required it to happen. So fragmentation was a better way to ensure that they you know, a collective effort towards achieving and attaining rights was, you know, could be the best possible way to ensure that, you know, this traction is not gained and sustained over the period. Yeah, so it's fragmentation exists, but it's not very okay. It's two-way. It's from an organic place where bisexual communities also feel that you know, they're left out from programming. But I think it's a systemic strategy by the opposition to ensure that a united front is dismantled.
Oh,
yeah,
that's a very comprehensive context there, but because it's a conversation that is still there, it exists with us, and if we are not tactful with it as an organizing, then it's something that is going to polarize even more. And just to push this to Ivy, feminism in its context, we've seen feminism being faulted at some point, and we've seen a lot of negative vibe going down the line in regards to feminist organizing. For example, radical feminists, liberal feminists, illiberal feminists. What would you put through to that, Ivy?
Yes, I want to begin by saying that all feminism is feminism, and the way in the way that in politics, for example, there's the far right, and the far left, probably happens in every aspect of organizing. I feel like because different groups have different needs, and therefore some of the needs are usually amplified more than others, or some are left behind, which is why as feminism has grown, there is this new this new wave of feminism called intersectionality, which recognizes that there are different needs and all of them are valid in whichever form and manner that they come in. And so now people are moving towards where you find words like trans inclusionary spaces, or where now LBQ organizing has even moved to being called LBQ GNC organizing, because we recognize that there are other genders within these spaces. And that is within itself a change that more of our conversations should be moving towards that space where what does intersectionality mean to us? Because as a human being, from my own personal experience, I am African, I am a woman, I am a lesbian. There are all of these identifiers that all come back to me, and so therefore, I can't expect that my experience will be the same as a Black African trans woman living in some other country, say in Europe. All of our needs are different, and therefore, through intersectionality, we are creating room for everyone to be seen and heard.
Awesome. Paulie, will you want to put a rejoinder to that? It's this feminist conversation is always emotive in its sense, because feminist organizing has faced extreme opposition, which is something that you have to be deliberate about. So perhaps, Paulie, if you can put something towards to that, proceed.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, yeah, the issue of feminism, what I can say from my end is that I love the organizing. At least we have seen spaces within the rural, LBQ women in rural coming out and also advocating for their rights, which is a plus, and it's also a milestone. I know when I say men can also be feminists, Africa will slap me. Yeah, but yeah, so I mean, it doesn't matter whether you are a man, whether you are a woman, we can all be feminists. But I appreciate the fact that rural LBQ women are coming out and actively championing for their rights, and this is a plus. And we've also seen a number of LBQ organizing and coming together as a collective. You see, when we come together, great things happen. And when we work together, then we can really achieve much. So it's a plus, and I think we can also learn from the LBQ organizing, or the feminist organizing in Kenya in general. And yeah, I think when we work together, and we can achieve even greater things rather than just having LBQ organizing or feminist organizing separately and GBMSM separately, then it becomes complex. But I understand that the issues might be different. They might want their own spaces to tackle these issues, but coming together, we can really make greater change. Back to you, Stephen.
Africa, speaking to what Paulie has just said, are men feminists? Africa.
I think okay, it depends with what someone believes. It depends with which men we are talking about. Yeah. Because I'm always of the idea that cisgender heterosexual men have a close proximity to power. You know, at the end of the day, the truth is the system benefits them in one way or the other. You know, like they enjoy these constant privileges that other people in, like, you know, the like structures of oppression do not experience. So personally for me, which is very political, I'm always of the idea that cis-het men should be allies to feminism, because I always feel when they say they are feminists, they come from a space of entitlement, you know. Mi ni feminist, mbona siwezi kuja hizo meetings? But the question is, if you're a feminist, or if you truly believe you're a feminist, or if you're an ally to feminism, why don't you use the privilege you have to infiltrate spaces where we women, trans and gender non-conforming people can't easily go to? An example is, I cannot go to a bar where men are sitting watching football and start talking about how when someone may withdraw consent katikati and you continue having sex, it's rape. They will shut me down. They will use a lot of misogynistic comments. They'll even say, "Me ni lesbian, what do I know?" But if a man who believes he's a feminist uses that opportunity to have that conversation, so you see, atakuwa may use privilege yake to get into spaces that we women, trans, and GNC people cannot easily get to. So yes, men can be feminists. It's okay, because at the end of the day, no one owns and no one doesn't own feminism. What matters is how do we use our privileges to ensure the humanization of women, trans, and people continues. Are you a feminist because you want to get the funding because in Africa squeezy wakona do? Are you a feminist because mbona siitwi meetings za feminism za LBQ? Or you are a feminist because you believe at the end of the day, everyone, regardless of their gender identity and sexual orientation, deserves to be treated equally? So that's the question.
Perhaps to push it to a board in a minute.
Sorry. Yeah, this is a very convoluted conversation, and because people have different, people come from different backgrounds, and from different school of thoughts. People have existed within different lived realities, and so that defines, how they choose to identify and how they choose to push back. Yeah, but I'm still going back to the question, or to the issue around: do we want to be enjoined, and do you want to consciously or unconsciously want to join into the tactics by the opposition to fragment from within us, right? I work for a feminist organization, and I identify as a feminist. And in my definition of feminism, it's about believing in the fact that women and men, in their different identities, should be equal and should have equal opportunities and chances at life, right? So from that perspective, then I consider myself a feminist, right? And so and there's been a lot of conversations, around what feminism is and what feminism is not about, right? And some of the things that probably Africa has highlighted could speak to the things that feminism is not about. And I mean, in every sort of bag of maize, you will definitely find some chaff, right? That have found themselves in the chaff and have managed to resemble the actual maize, right? And so it requires a lot of attention and detail to be able to separate that, right? So it's also our role as people who identify as feminists to be able to pick out chaff from real wheat or from real maize, right? But just back to the conversation around feminism. I think, and from my school of thought, I feel both cis men and cis women, and every other identity, gender non-conforming, LBQ persons, trans identifying persons, it's about a personal choice, because a gay man can also not fit well in a cis heterosexual space and fully identify as a gay man. And we've seen that with a gay political party trying to vie for presidency. What happened? What was the turnout, right? You if you're all readers of history, you'll agree with me that the result of that process wasn't as good as expected, right? So it means even this ostracization exists within the cis men heterosexual spaces. And so my call to every other person who identifies as a feminist is: how about we return to unify ourselves to a common purpose? How about we use the instrument of identity, we use the instrument of pushing back to be able, to define how we shape our struggles? And let's not allow fragmentation settle in and sort of make us, spittle about from our true identity and for our true purpose. Yeah, so I'm a feminist, and I will appeal to every other person who feel that both genders should be treated equally to identify as a feminist and to push back into that ideology and to return everyone to the ideology of rights and equality of all genders.
Yeah, of importance is if you don't work together, then we create room for misogyny to thrive. And that is actually what we are fighting against as a collective in all our identities. And just in the same breath, about around narratives that really exist within the queer organizing as an impediment. We know that these retrogressive narratives, which present themselves as impediments. So, encountering retrogressive narratives, are we really well resourced? Are we really well equipped? And are we positioned enough to manage impediments in law, culture, and religion? Over to you, Abot.
I think the opposition is organizing well and better than how we are organizing, and it's appalling to see how much they have achieved in very little time, and the slow and gradual process that our varied efforts have been able to yield. And back to the conversation around fragmentation, back to the conversation around polarization, back to the conversation around division, and scatter of purpose. Are we well resourced enough? I just probably referred us to a report, the Vibrant and Under Resourced, that then highlights how organizing has existed over time, how organizing has been able to the LBK organizing, the LGBT organizing has been able to, highlight some of their challenges in terms of support. And when I'm talking of support, let's not just length this around external support. Let's think about how much the government of Kenya, who is the primary custodian of rights and who should be able to ensure that each and every other person is able to live fully and enjoy their rights, right? How much do they, for example, set aside to promote and protect the rights of LGBT people? Very little. And we just referencing to Kenya, very little, right? So there's very little that has gone into this kind of support. And maybe just if you could give, if I could reflect us back to March of last year all the way to now, and how much humanitarian support was lengthed, our communities, LGBT communities, got very little of the support from the government, right? And if you had actually approached this support that was being offered by the government in your true identity, chances are very high that you would have not received either that slot in the Kazi Mtaani or that monthly stipend that the government was sharing to people. Yeah. And every other place, your guess should be as good as mine. So I think we well prepared, because one of the areas that intentionally UHAI is working in is on areas of intersectionalities. And we've already spoken elaborately about feminism and about how marginalization exists within the organizing, and how we intentionally. So we have highlighted that there are communities, including LBQ, that have been fighting for space, have been fighting for funding, and very little funding has been coming down and support, because most of these has been sort of linked around a pathology, HIV and AIDS and all that. And when you look at a lot of women's organizations and women's programs, also it's only until very recently that some of this traction has begun to fruition, and because of a lot of thought leadership and a lot of philanthropic advocacy that UHAI and the rest of us have has been able to put to that place. But still, we're still not doing enough. There's still a lot to happen that needs to happen, even in terms of humanitarian support, even in terms of how advocacy should be linked. How many funders, for example, except individuals and public foundations, would fund a decree petition in Kenya, or piece of work around organizing for decree in Kenya? Yeah. The PEPFARs, the USAIDs, the global funds would only fund HIV prevention because it's linked to an epidemic, right? To an epidemic, and trying to contain it and curtail it and all that. Yeah. So I think is there enough resources? No. And with the resources comes a lot capacity. So can we say for sure and for certain that we have enough strength to be able to push back? I think we are somewhere, but we're not there yet. And we still, like they say, learning is a gradual process. I think we need to learn from how Angola did it. We need to learn from how South Africa managed to do their stuff. We need to learn on how to be able to address culture, because I think one of the biggest impediment has been culture and religion, right? So how these two play along, and how we can be able to interact with them progressively to the point of gaining enough traction within those spaces, and then that will be able to inform political processes and narratives, and generally how they scope and how they lens queer organizing in Kenya.
That was in depth. That was in depth. In the spirit of opposition, we exist, as much as sexuality is fluid, but the environment in which we also operate is extremely fluid as well, in terms of changing dynamics. And opposition is leveraging on this advantage, and opposition is well resourced, well advantaged, and it's on a point of leverage. Just to ask Paulie, in terms of opposition resourcing, in terms of opposition management, religion and service delivery to the queer community, at what point does these two conflict? Religion and service delivery to the queer community, at what point does this conflict? Let's take, for example, in healthcare systems. Over to you, Paulie. You're on mute. Paulie, you got me. Perhaps when Paulie is still setting up, I'll want to just come back to Ivy. Ivy, in in terms of conversion therapy, and we understand conversion therapy is one of the biggest instruments used by opposition to create a leverage. What will you speak to it?
First, I'd like to discredit it as it being therapy, because there has never been any proof that it has worked. So I would like to discredit it as being called conversion therapy, and we as GALC, we've been moving towards calling it conversion therapy practices, because these are just practices which again the opposition have put in place, where young adults, young people who have come out and talked about, or who are seen in a certain kind of way, are then taken to these places where they're put through demeaning practices that they later have to deal with in their adult life. And so when it comes to conversion therapy practices, the thing about it is it hasn't been recorded. Like, we don't have a recording of it within our country, or there's no body of work that really shows whether it exists. But then we know from personal experiences, like when you talk to other people, we know that there are people who have experienced this. And through some of the work that we are doing in partnership with Outright International, we are working on this, collecting these stories, because it is about time that we put it out there for people to know what exactly is happening, and to be able to create awareness around some of the methods of violence that are being pushed towards us.
Yeah, and just to explore further this concept around, because we've understood for quite a long time that both us within the spectrum of LGBT IQ, we've faced extreme scenarios of corrective rape, do we classify it as a conversion therapy practice? Ivy.
So both of them work differently. Yes, it works. Like when it comes to corrective rape, I'd say that yes, the motive behind it is to convert this person to find out that like why they're wrong about being who they are. So I'd also put it inside there where we find people who identify as bi, gay, lesbian, all of this under the LGBTI umbrella. We find people, there's an aircon, sorry, but then there's, these are all practices that are towards changing a person, like your either your sexual orientation or your gender identity, and all of them are violent to a person. So yes, I'd also include it within gender like conversion therapy practices.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Africa, would you want to put a agenda to this in relation to conversion therapy and feminism in relation to LBQ organizing?
No, nothing much. I would just love to agree with what Ivy has said by saying they would like to refute the fact that conversion therapy is not a form of therapy. When we talk about conversion therapy, oftentimes we look at very extreme cases of things like corrective rape, which actually happens, and people being taken to camps that are meant to cure your gayness and such like stuff. But we also forget that we constantly face everyday instances of conversion therapy even in our homes. For example, when you come out and your mom spends the whole month sending people to pray for you in the house, unaombewa, kuna majini, unaenda church, people have already talked here and there saying you're queer, then all of a sudden wepi ukienda huko kuambewa, like you're being treated differently. So I feel like conversion therapy is a conversation that we really need to have as the wider LGBTIQ community, because these things are happening, but we do not know how to talk about it, partly because maybe the conversation is not as common in our grassroots spaces as we would want it to be, and also because of the shame. Like, let's say, for example, me. Let's say my mom doesn't know I'm queer, right? And then all of a sudden she hears rumors that your daughter posts some girl who looks like a boy every week on Facebook. The first thing that will come to my mom's mind is she'll take me to church to be prayed for, because my family, we grew up having a Legio Maria background. And she will say they're demons, some are majini, and I will be prayed for every single week or something of that sort. Father Taitwa and people to pray because this kid has majini and stuff. And you find that the shame that comes with that will not enable me to even talk to someone about it, because I'll be embarrassed. People will be like, hey, African ile knowledge yake yote ni aje hajai come out, ni aje anaombewa kwa church, kwani she can't speak up vile ako vocal. So we do not have spaces that encourage such like conversations, and I feel this is something that a lot of LGBT organizations should look like, especially in their organizing, where we just have support group for people who've experienced some form of conversion therapy at some point in their lives. I'm even sure there are so many people who've experienced corrective rape, but they did not know that was corrective rape, because no one could sit back and point back and say, this is not right. Your father forcing you to have sex with a woman because you've come out as gay is not right. Your mother bringing a man to have sex with you is not right. So let's create these spaces to enable more conversations around this to happen. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Anytime we talk about these conversion therapy practices, it comes with a lot of emotion, because it's a lived reality that we talk about, but with a lot of emotion, just like I said. And at times we want to talk about them at the back of the door, and we don't want to be seen and don't want to be heard. And this translates awesomely to some extreme mental health struggles that really are uncalled for at this time this century in time. Before we got to Ivy, I'd actually placed a question to Paulie Kap around religion and service delivery to the queer community. At what point do these two conflict? And I gave a practical case scenario of within the healthcare system. Over to you, Paulie.
Thank you very much, Okwan, for this. When we talk about religion and homosexuality, this is a very huge topic in the sense that in Kenya, as a country, you've realized that most of the politicians, they really depend on the church. The church, as I say, the church is very influential in even pushing for some of these decisions or even these policies as a country. So we realize that there's a very huge disconnect between the high-profile religious leaders with the likes of, I don't know if they forget mentioning names, but Ole Sapit, among others, and these low religious leaders that we have continuously engaged in our sensitizations meeting. So for them, they are very much sensitized and they're accommodative even within their spaces. But for the high-profile religious leaders who politicians use, they are still homophobic, and as we try to push for inclusion, then it becomes very problematic, especially when politicians tend to use them. And so there's a huge difference between the high-profile religious leaders and those ones that are at the grassroots that we continuously sensitize. Initially, the church used to be a safe space for everyone, irrespective of sexual orientation, identities, among others. But today, the church is no longer a safe space because as an LGBTI person, you have to think, you have to worry continuously, like, how am I going to be viewed because of the stereotypes and also the labels within the church environment. And this has made community members not even go to church. So religion is a very, very huge topic, and it dictates so many things in terms of inclusivity for the LGBTI persons. Then when we talk about health, most of the LGBTI persons worry a lot about being mistreated, harassed, or denied quality healthcare provision because of the stigma and discrimination. So there's a connection between religion and healthcare provision. Why? Let me give an example. If I go to a healthcare facility and I meet a nurse who is more into religion, or let me say for that matter, this nurse will look at me differently, and that is where conversion therapy also comes in. Instead of giving me quality services, or instead of taking care of my needs at that particular time, then they will start telling me about salvation and all that. So you see, it becomes very much stressful to these LGBTI persons seeking for quality healthcare provision. Earlier on, I mentioned about the social and gender norms, which contributes a lot to the stigma and discrimination within the LGBTI, within the church setup, and also within the healthcare provision level. Why? Because other people who are still rooted, they still think the old way, and they still like, you're a man, you're supposed to behave this way. You're a woman, you're supposed to behave this way. So that has also caused a lot of harm within the LGBTI persons in the religion setup and also in the healthcare provision.
Okay, Paulie, just to cut you short, I think your audio it's a bit fast. It looks like a rap. I thought for a minute that you're having entertainment, a song from you, but perhaps I could, as you work on the audio, because it's a bit fast. Like even the participants are asking whether you have internet issues. Kindly look into it, and then perhaps we could have one other panelists to just try to address this question: religion and service delivery to the queer community. At what point do they conflict? And giving a case scenario of the healthcare system. Africa, would you mind to have a go?
Okay, I hope I'm clear because my phone is going off, so I can't use my earphones at the same time. So I haven't done a lot of work with healthcare systems sadly, partly because I feel like a lot of healthcare providers get to a point where they find it very difficult to differentiate between the prejudice and the professionalism. And same happens to religious leaders, because I think I've gotten to a point where it's hard for me to reconcile my sexuality and religion, because I find that my interaction with religion from the word go came from a space of shame and ridicule, and just like, making me feel like I was not worth it. So I won't talk much about it, honestly, because I haven't done a lot of programming with them. So maybe in another forum, if I decide to be open-minded enough and be able to hear what they have to say without being triggered, and we meet in the middle point, I might be able to share my issues. But currently my organizing is not around the two. Yeah.
Ivy, would you mind to have a go around just religion and service delivery? Why is service delivery pegged on our sexuality as opposed to the actual service? Why do they conflict? Yes.
I think my initial thought when you asked this question was, it's hard for people to separate the two issues, where because in your mind you have these prejudices where you think a gay person is illegal, and therefore their existence doesn't even matter to you. By just saying that, you've stripped away the dignity of the person who you're supposed to be serving. It takes away from the services that you're supposed to offer to this person, remembering that before their whatever it is, their sexuality, their gender identity, you forget that this is a person to begin with. It's also tied to the fact that people, like our churches, our schools, we've come up in spaces that are highly Christian, like in spaces where the stories of the Bible, we are talked to about heaven and hell, and out of fear, like the fear that is bred through religious scripts, you find people will probably not even try to tap into their empathy, which now goes, like, to me, it's a conversation of what does empathy even look like? Because when I'm coming to you, I'm at my, I don't know, like I'm sick, and what I need is not for you to take your Bible and start preaching to me. What I need at this time is for you to try and help me out with one thing or the other. Yeah, that's my response.
I think maybe we lost Steven Okwan. So yeah, as we wait for Steven to probably come in, I'll just chime in with my feedback around the conversations around religion and how they interact with health and service delivery entirely. I think generally our political system, both within Africa and in Kenya, are largely linked with the religion, and then that then defines how health and generally health service delivery and provision outlooks or relays to the people who needs to consume some of these services. Part of the pieces of work that we have been engaging with in the past few days has been generally around past few months has been generally around how the exploitation of religious homophobia from some of these Western countries has sort of influenced and informed negatively how our political processes and how our laws have been sort of structured. Because then the entire infrastructure of legal and policy issues have been, structured around homophobia that is very silent, but that is targeting with the harm and vitriol LGBTI communities, right? So we have a constitution that speaks about the right to health, yeah, and our courts also in some of the decisions around queer organization registration and identities reaffirmed that Kenya is a poly-religious country, and so therefore issues of morality cannot be sort of choreographed and linked within the ambits of religion. And so I find that to be very liberal. I find that to be very promising. But just to segue, health as a service delivery a package should not be in any way linked to religion, because then religion speaks to a different thing. I can live without spiritual and spiritual sort of services, right? I can live and thrive without that, but I cannot live when I am not well mentally, when I'm not well physically, because then that limits my ability to show up. It limits my ability to deliver, right? And even speaking about contributing to Kenya's economy, when we're speaking about contributing to changing the society, I mean, there are people of different professions whose identity is only a part of them, and it doesn't define them entirely, right? And so I feel that the conflict that exists between religion and service delivery is a conflict that needs to be debunked. It's a conflict that doesn't even really need to exist, because then these are two different things. What is we highlighting in over a decade of experience that we have been working with our communities is the fact that mental health for the longest time has been defined in separately from general health service delivery. But then we find that mental health in itself and some of the for lack of a better word, some of the issues that then make people not to enjoy a better mental and sanity place is because of how religion defines humanity, and how religion defines what is morality and what is not, what is not accepted within the religious realms should then relay and guide how society should be able to handle some of these concerns. So I think the two, because the two should not be able to link with each other, because religion in every sense is a contributor to the violence, right? In religion, in its very sense, is a contributor to why we're not making progress, and at the same time, it's shunning and killing most of us. But even just to segue, I think religion by itself, I find it's a fallacy. Why? Because we were colonized and then we moved away from colonization and we got independence, but we still get a lot of religious interference. And I will probably spotlight Uganda. And I think we all know about whatever happened with the anti-homosexuality bill and some of the people who funded that piece entirely. We have the Bishop's Empires. We have, was it Scots, who funded that process entirely, and then when they went back to their countries, they had to face the law. And in Kenya, we find our religious leaders escaping a lot of a lot of this, and the scrutiny that we are trying to relay to the church is, I think, the whole aspect of liberal should be a thing that even the church should embrace, right, in entirety. So the conflict that exists within religion and sexuality should be something that we need to work around debunking. But yes, it's a conflict that exists, and most of the time service delivery is defined by religious pieces. And maybe just to segue, we all understand the dynamics all around safe and legal abortion, right? And how religious leaders have defined when life begins and when life ends, and how in a spirit they've put up a spirited fight, trying to remove bodily autonomy from women, how to remove sort of bodily integrity and decision for women to make choices over their bodies. So I think religion should find a way of disconnecting itself from service delivery that is of a healthcare nature entirely.
Wow, thank you so much, Abot, for that elaborate rejoinder, and also for stepping in when I dropped. Internet is teaching us a lot of things, huh?
Third world problems, huh?
I tell you. But I want to, at this point, move a bit to our participants at the chat to just check what questions exist there that needs our attention. And one, I'm having a question from, from Cecil to the panel. How do we engage within the society to break the barriers of culture? Because our laws are derived from cultural perspective, and this has hindered a lot of LGBT work, especially on having a safe space within the society. How do we engage within the society to break the barriers of culture? Because our laws are derived from the cultural perspective, and this has hindered a lot of LGBT work, especially on having a safe space within the community. Well, I'll start with, because I'll give a round for all the panelists, at least a minute to put through a rejoinder. So I'll start off with Ivy. Please proceed.
My initial thought is there's a lot that we can learn from history. What culture we have right now is like a coming together of the last 40 to 50 years. But before that, there were cultural practices, there were things that we did that have since been erased because of colonialization, because our colonizers came in with their own rule of law, and those who are left here. The biggest thing that happened to us as Kenyans was the coming of the new constitution, because we were finally able to take away from what our rulers, or like the colonizers, had left, and we had come up with our own way of living. But then there's still that constant back and forth between now the Christian fundamentalists are like, this is what God says as a Christian state, and I'll put very big air quotes on that because we are a free state, versus what the Constitution says. That kind of brings in the confusion of, but then the conversations around morality are taken away from where they began. But yeah, my point is that there is a lot to be learned from where we came from. There are books, there are conversations around what African traditional cultures looked like. And if we are going to come in and see that something like homosexuality is an African, then I think there are more things out there that we need to do.
Perhaps to hand it over to you, Kennedy, about what will be a rejoinder on that insight in reference to cultures and the barriers that exist, and how culture really plays into policy, into laws. Over to you.
Yeah, I think for me, the problem that we have as Africans, maybe just to plug in and just add more on Ivy's perspective around the Constitution, right? That was the one time that Kenyans, for the first time in history, decided and said, we're going to be the drivers of our destiny. We're going to be the people to define how we want to live and how we want to project ourselves to the rest of the world. And I will return myself to one of my favorite quotes by someone called Charles de Monstake, who says that in the state of nature, all men are born equal, but they cannot continue in this equality. Why? Because society makes them lose it. And they can only be able to recover that by the protection of the law, right? And then there are different philosophers and thinkers who've also, Mandela, for example, said that when you decide to be silent during the times of oppression, then you're choosing the side of the oppressor. I think in this case, we're looking at culture being the oppressed, because looking at culture, for the longest time, women were allowed, were not allowed to do particular things, not to lead in their movements, not to have a say in the smallest of units, which is the family. For the longest time, women have been marginalized, being subjected to things like genital mutilation, being subjected to a lot of harm and humiliation, right? So all these were anchored in culture. So why is the law, segregating around issues to protect and issues not to protect? Yet there's a voice that is loud enough, and yet there's evidence that violence permeates within the gaps that are in the law. Because we have a constitution that is very progressive and speaks about the rights of everyone, including gender and sexual minorities. And then we have the penal code, which is still a document that resembles the colonial rulers' ways of governing and maintaining order. And then we have a penal code, section 162 to 165, that still subjects LGBT organization with threat and vitriol, right? So I think culture is an aspect that needs to be debunked like any other, because it comes a lot of fetterization, and every other time, even in the African Commission, look at the beautiful work that Pan-Africanists who identify as gender and sexual minority and even sex workers have done with the African Commission of Human and People's Rights, and even with the African courts. But then you have all that work, and then when you go to the secretariat where all the presidents sit, then they make resolutions to to water down some of those efforts, and most of their sort of argue, and let me also put those air quotes. Most of the reasoning that their lawyers and legal people, and even in their open plenary presentation, has always been around culture and religion. So let me problematize this a little bit. Can we say for sure that the clothes we wear are African cultures? No. We should be seeing guys in parliament wearing, clothes made out of animal skin, right? But then we've decided to pick one culture because we feel it's progressive, and then we're not picking another culture because we feel it's not progressive. And then some of these, even technological advancements and innovations and stuff, we're borrowing that from the West, and yet the West, who lives as with the penal code, have changed their penal code to allow for queer organizing to thrive, for allow people to enjoy their rights. But then you choose blindly to not figure out that, because then you have fundamentalists who are religious, and we have hangers-on who then define what progressive culture should be and what progressive religion should be. So I think, for me, is the only way to engage with culture and religion, by extension, is to ensure that there's equal protection, in the law, and to ensure that we are able to to cast sort of roll down all these protections in the law to every segment of society. It's the only way we are going to be equal, and we're going to be able to advance at the law as human beings with equal rights. Yes, over to you.
Thank you. Africa, will you have a rejoinder to the question that has been asked, has been put across by Cecil Conchala, talking about correlation of cultural integration to law. And by the way, by the way, before you go, I just want you to marry it to a question that I really wanted to ask you. What does culture speak to feminism within a specific bias, with a specific bias to LBQ women?
Okay, so maybe a lot of people have said what I wanted to say, where they say, you know, like culture is prone to evolving, and that is something that our community hasn't made peace with, because we are a society that loves to nitpick what suits us and what doesn't suit us, because you see conversations on social media with people saying this is not our culture, but they would do something that is totally not their culture, and you know, at the end of the day, be like, what is happening? So for me, I think another thing that can really help LGBTI organizing in relation to breaking social barriers when it comes to culture is constantly ensuring that LGBTI people are humanized. My first interaction with homophobes always comes from them being ignorant about a lot of things, and that is because, even speaking as a lesbian, because you know, like lesbian women and women who love women in the community are some of the most fetishized, like you know, humans around. People can't see us beyond sex. People can look at us beyond sex. And I'm even very happy to say I had a chance to watch the I Am Samuel screening before it was released last year, and it really opened my eyes, because this was a gay person, an openly gay person, going to their father in Luyaland to tell them they were queer, and you would see the conflict that the whole issue created in the family, you know, to a point where the father struggles to make peace with it, but like has to make peace now completely. And it really hit me, because you know, as someone who's in between a millennial and a Generation Z, most of the like, you know, stories I get around LGBT narratives comes from a sexual point of view. But getting to see Samuel in that moment, being humanized, being seen as a person with complex emotions and thoughts and everything, was that much of a challenge to me, because I remember leaving that place feeling like, oh my God, everyone needs to watch this. Everyone needs to watch this. And you know, it was a documentary that I could even show my mom, and she would not have to understand big words and jargon and everything for her to get to know that at the end of the day, LGBTI people are like, you know, humans. They're our children, they're our sisters, siblings, and everything. And then maybe to, like, you know, marry it from a feminism and an LBQ perspective, I think culture still hinders a lot of our organizing so many times, because there's so many norms and traditions and beliefs of how women need to look like and act and be in the society. And that is why it's even a bone of contention in like, you know, mainstream feminist meetings that has everyone, for you to hear all the heterosexual feminists say, you know, me, I was afraid kitambo I couldn't identify as a feminist because they would say I'm a lesbian. And it's funny, because it shows us how, like, feminists were automatically branded as lesbians, because these were women who were refusing to pander to patriarchy and, like, you know, the expectations that came with it. And even up to now, it's very tricky, because sometimes it's even hard to have a genuine open conversation about issues like, even, let's say, gender-based violence, because there are communities that have beliefs that, you know, go, like, you know, you need to beat your wife for things to be okay. And the saddest thing, these are like beliefs that are even carrying themselves in the LBQ community, in the feminist community. We are having forums where people are women, trans and gender non-conforming, where if you step outside the space, which is a safe space, automatically society sees you as a female body, because, you know, that's what they see. But you hear someone sit down and they say, mi lazima nichape my partner, you know, ndio wanisikie. It's really alarming, because it shows us how culture, in as much as sometimes, you know, it's good because, you know, like with identity and everything, it also has a vicious grip on us that has refused to let us go. And the funniest thing is, we are carrying the norms and like, you know, harmful beliefs from heterosexual settings into the mainstream LGBTI settings. And that is why things like toxic masculinity and heteronormativity are on the rise, because culture is making us believe that the things that we are doing on the other side, yes, they are wrong because the big bad perpetrator is a man. But when it comes to LBQ spaces, it's ifs and buts. And, you know, that is why it's even easy for cases of intimate partner violence in LBQ spaces to be met with things like, can we sit down and talk about this? Like, why would you want to sit down with an abuser and talk about violence? You know, if it was a man, automatically hatungesikia anything, tungemshika first, tungekuwa tuna reason kama ako kondele. But when it comes to in LBQ spaces, we suddenly want to have a lot of ifs and buts, and you know, and it's even sad. It's even sad because this is something that will not even die overnight. And I'm saying this as someone in their early 20s who gets to see what young people write and talk about on social media. It's horrifying because the harmful, toxic cultures that we've grown up, you know, like subscribing to and believing, are the things that we keep on channeling back into our behaviors in these spaces. So I don't know how exactly we are going to do this. When it comes to culture hindering, like, you know, LGBT organizing, because that's a thing. And in as much as I said, we need to humanize LGBTI people and tell our stories, because also there's like a gap in between what LGBTI stories are. There's also a need to have honest and open conversations on what culture looks like, what can be kept, what is toxic, what is harmful, because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, times are changing, and culture, which is a way of, you know, like a particular community's beliefs, actions, acts, and everything needs to change with it. We should not treat culture like it's something constant that cannot be moved, because as times changes, our behaviors, our thoughts, and our beliefs do. So I do believe culture in itself, it's something that can actually be changed as time goes by. And maybe this can happen through even having this conversation outside this space, because the way Cecil said, and I'm so happy he brought that up, culture is really hindering our organizing, both in the wider LGBTI community, in LBQ spaces, and even in feminist spaces. Yeah.
Wow, what a word. Paulie, perhaps if you give it a specific touch to GBMSM in relation to culture and how it affects laws and the consumption of the same laws. Please proceed. Seems like Paulie is having a challenge with the internet. Paulie? Okay. Perhaps if we could, excuse Paulie for a minute as he works on his audio.
Thank you very much, Okwan. Can you hear me now?
Sure, we can.
Or it's still rapping?
No, it's awesome. Proceed.
Yes, can you hear me, Okwan?
Yeah, loud and clear. Please proceed.
Yes, Okwan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. When we talk about social and cultural norms. Okay, when we
Paulie, seems like your machine has refused.
Okay, social and cultural norms. Can I proceed?
Yes, proceed.
Maybe you could step in.
Okay, when we talk about social and cultural norms within the GBMSM community, it is a great
Paulie, we'll allow you. Seems like your machine is taking our voices later. after the word. So perhaps we'll allow you some minutes later to just pick up and give a summary presentation. About you could put a word through. Welcome.
Oh, yeah, yes. It's thank you, Paulie. Maybe you could just text, and then I can be able to sort of amplify your concerns or your feedback that you had for this particular question. Yeah, but it's not very different and varied totally away from the same perspectives and the same experiences that LBQ communities face. In fact, I think it's even more toxic within the men-dominated spaces because of the whole aspect of heteronormativity and toxic masculinity. Because then and part of the things that informed the genesis of feminism is because the men feel that they should be the leaders in society, whether it be it in the cultural spaces, whether it be it in the religious spaces, and in the different other realms, right? So you as a man coming into this space and identifying to be the other gender who they would want to be submissive to them disturbs that norm, right? And so they would see you as someone who's trying to sort of mess with that the organization that they have in their mind and their head in terms of how a society should be and should exist. And so that's we know everything about how stereotypes and how the stereotypes inform prejudice, and then how the prejudice when they've judged you and stuff, and then they resort to violence, and some of the violence is often brute, things like murders. We've seen such cases, things like where people lose an organ and critical parts of their body because they were burnt to death, or they were beaten, to sort of scare away the gayness in them and stuff. Yeah, so it's harsh in that sense. And gay men and bisexual men and men who identify as men who have sex with men undergo a lot of violence and are ostracized in so many spaces that are male dominated because they conform with a reality that is not highly welcomed by toxic masculinities and by general heteronormativity, and then men who borrow and align with that school of thought. Yeah, so violence is something, is a way to communicate that, or generally sidelining particular identities that then seem to demean the female and the female definition and lengthening of what a man is and what gender role men should play.
Awesome,
Yes.
awesome. Just to get back to the chat and to read at least some few comments. The Dioming Lodge says, I don't think there is a law that criminalizes one's sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity. However, the sections of the Penal Code 165 have then criminalized the act of gross indecency of any male person with another male person. And this just takes me to a question that I'd like to ask Ivy. The decrim ruling for Report 162, 165. What did we learn from that? And are we better organizing for a bit, an awesome outcome for the okay? Are we better organizing for a win at the appeal court? Because I know the case is about to be. I think it's about to be aired. A ruling is about to be given. Are we better organizing for a win? Over to you.
So yes, first of all, I agree with that comment that there's nowhere in the law that says same-sex relationships are illegal. It's certain acts that have been lumped up to homosexuals or trans people, like whoever the society deems as wrong, they just equated to those people. So yes, that was my first point. which I want to further say that it is, it's weird that the acts, the gross indecency, those acts are just lumped up to this group of people, because at the end of the day, we know that everyone does these things. So do we then say that now everyone in the country is someone who needs to be in jail? Because again, that's the argument. Like, it doesn't make any sense at the end of the day. When it comes to the lessons that were learned during the Decrim court case, first of all, as a person who was on the outside looking in, it was amazing to see so many queer people, allies, partners, all come together to push for one thing. I had never seen that before. I had seen, say, Pride Month celebrations, or there's this group of LBQ women who are meeting somewhere, or MSMs have organized a drag night. There was such small, separate, sort of like coming together of people. But then when Repeal 162 happened, there was a lot of attention. There was a lot of like a lot of us invested in seeing a positive ruling, and from it, it was clear that it wasn't about a lack of organizing by queer organizations. It was probably people have never felt confident enough to be seen and to be heard. By the kind of publicity that we got during this time, it was able to show that queer people have the confidence to go out there and demand their rights. And that was a lesson that we are taking now as we are reworking our case towards appealing for it. It just goes back to being, how do we further raise awareness for, like within this topic, within this conversation, we've talked about the level of shame that comes from conversion therapy practices. We've talked about how religion is an impediment to how service is delivered to people. We've talked about all of these things. So by having these conversations, we are raising awareness, and it also helps someone who's somewhere out there who doesn't feel like they're heard or seen to know that there are more people out here who are doing the work, and it all just comes together. Yeah.
Yeah. But you are also a bit pronounced at the litigation process for Repeal 165. Would you mind putting in a word?
Yeah, maybe I'll just return my conversation to the point around how the opposition have been able to organize. And we could see how, in as much as we had allies, and we sort of had a unity of a purpose. And for the first time, like Ivy rightly puts it, I saw organizing, leaving alone their politics, leaving alone their, setting aside their grudges, and coming to unite for a cause that was going to define the history of human rights for LGBT, and by extension, even the sex workers in Kenya. And I think for me, it also was a moment to just read the landscape in Kenya. For the longest time, political players have gone mum around their perspectives and their purviews around sexual agenda minorities. But then they will always pick it up when we head to elections, just to spearhead, and because roots from it and opium for just continuing with their agendas. But that was the one time when we also saw Kenyans speak either to or against the issue on social media, which is also in programming we call it a scorecard, which is more of a scorecard around how our efforts, our advocacy efforts, have the effect that it's having in the community, in the society. Yeah. So back to the question around how the law frames what is criminalizing and what is allowed within the Kenyan context. Yeah, the constitution itself does not speak much to it, and there have been attempts to fix a few parts of the constitution to return it to a place where it doesn't speak to human rights for everyone, including LGBT. Yeah, but I think the one thing that speaks outrightly against same-sex relationships is the penal code, which I feel should be fixed, or and because the other alternative to not fixing the constitution is to come up with a progressive law that better defines, or that is an addendum to that part that says, okay, this is it, but then we're coming up with a bill. And you know how Kenya, your guess should be as good as mine if such a bill goes to parliament. It might not see the light of day. But the other thing that also that process spoke to is that there is a greater need for advocacy that comes from, and I'm not referring to the political rhetoric around the bottom up, but I'm referring to the advocacy that speaks from grassroots coming all the way up. Because the reading of how Kenya, the reading of how the Kenyan populace commented on the issue on social media was that not so many people were okay with a same sexual agenda minority, people, and there are things like yes, you can be gay, yes, you can be lesbian, yes, you can be a queer person, but please do it privately, don't express it to us and stuff. But I'm like, if two heterosexuals walk in broad daylight and they're holding hands, why shouldn't I walk with my partner and hold hands on the streets? So there are pieces of that. But then what that spoke to me was that there's need for, because how our laws have been structured, it only allowed for us to be comfortable to sort of advocate for our issues at an international level and at a regional level, with the UN mechanisms, with the African and regional mechanisms, and then with the policy makers and policy holders. But then how did we lose it in terms of how to engage with that mama mboga, how to engage with the border people, and that how to engage with the cultural leaders. And I think after that process of 162, when it went to the High Court, we've seen a lot of such activities happening, where community organizations now start to engage with border people, and they start to engage with all these different other players, so that a momentum is built, so that by the time we get to the appeal court, at least the reading and and there's some level and some degree of liberalization of a majority of Kenyans, right? But the beauty of it is that we've seen precedents that has been set. So even when we saw 162 not speaking to our favor, there are different precedents that have been set by lower courts. And so that only means that courts that are lower than those particular courts cannot make a ruling that speaks against that ruling, because a higher court has already, sorry, I'm not a legal person, but there's a term for how, like, a lower court cannot make a ruling that speaks against what a higher court had made a ruling on. So that precedent is very positive, and we talk maybe just to refer to some of that, the Nigel Hack case, the transgender education advocacy case, a few trans people, that were arrested by particular county askaris or police, and then the charges were around impersonation, or with attempts to go against the law or to defraud Kenyans and stuff. We've seen courts in Eldoret, issue very progressive rulings. We've seen a court in Mombasa issuing or decreeing that annual testing is illegal and unconstitutional, right? So there's momentum that is building. It's gradual, and I think, and this is just my personal opinion, it's my part, but I think there's some falter in that progression, in the sense that how our laws and policies are defined, right? That entire infrastructure is very much linked to the political reading of the country. So if the president of Kenya would appear in a global interview and says it's a non-issue, definitely, and because the courts are, in as much as we have independent courts, but for some reason, for one way or the other, the courts are very dependent on the executive, who defines how much budget supports their causes, right? So that interrelation, they will be like, and you've seen some of these appeals have been, it's been the Attorney General, who's been appealing most of this. It means that there are political players who are not sinking in well with, Kenya being, for lack of a better word, an homosexuality free sort of country, liberal country, right? Yeah. So I think the main issue is how to engage with political players, because we've tried engaging with them at the African Commission. It's been difficult, and of course, because of that place, you have Arab countries and stuff. We've tried engaging them with them at the UN and with other international mechanisms, and we've seen very good pressure that has been cascaded down, and that has allowed for some of these things to happen. But I think it's still an issue of engaging with political leaders. We've seen in Kisumu, for example, when members of county assembly, who are politicians, try to come up with a bill, So it's the issues with the politicians, because I think there's already very good reasoning. I think there's already very good human rights conformity with the courts. The problem is with our executive, and the problem is with our politicians, and the other problem is generally the mamambogas, generally the border people, So that, when you do that, when we do some work, some level of work around that lower level, but also with our political players, maybe we could get to where Angola is, we could get to where South Africa is. It's still a conversation that is, is being furthered, and let's see how it goes. Yeah, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Bot, for the deep insights. Perhaps as we come to the end, the tail bit of this session, I just want to throw another question to Ivy, and I just want to ask, because we've seen a lot of religious organizing, and also we understand the position within the religious setup. And my question is the pulpit safe enough for us? This discriminatory text being preached in a way that how else can they be preached in a way that is much more accommodative towards the queer community to really consume spiritual services within the different facilities, the mosques, the churches, and the temples? Over to you in a minute, please.
Okay, so my general thought towards this is that, first of all, like our pastors, or I know about churches, so I know that they have a very prescriptive way about how they go about teaching their followers. So with that intent, it then means that depending on the pastor who you, I don't know, commune with, then you're left in a situation where you take in what they say, or the pastor will go to the exact what is it called? The exact book or verse that speaks against homosexuality. I remember we had spoken about, for example, Genesis 19, 1 to 11, which is about Sodom and Gomorrah. And that has always been a very interesting section within the Bible, because most of the arguments always go back to that place, but then again in the very prescriptive way that people nitpick and choose what they want. You'll find that they never go back to the intention, like what the story was about, which was um, even before Lot, or whatever that story, however that story goes, before Lot and his family were chased and they had to go away. You find that if there was the intention that this city needed to be destroyed, and there was an intercession and it didn't happen, and the reason why this place was burnt down wasn't because these people were homosexual, it was because these people were actually violent and unaccommodating, and they weren't hospitable to these angels of God who had come to, see whatever was happening. But this is not a sermon. What I'm trying to say is people choose what they want from the Bible, and they use it for their own, like they interpret it in the way they want it to like according to whatever it is that they want to happen. And that within itself then shows that right now I can't say that in our country that the pulpit is safe, because the very intention that Christianity was formed on, the message of love, of hope, of togetherness, that is not what I see when I turn on. There's all of these channels that have pastors preaching. That's not the feeling we get from the leaders of their soul, their spirit. That's how they call themselves. But it doesn't feel safe being around a person who says that the very person that I am is a sin, a crime, and therefore, again, going back to scriptures, I should be stoned, I should be done all of these things. So no, I wouldn't say it's safe.
Okay, thank you very much, Ivy. I think at this juncture we've come to the end of our session today, and I just want to appreciate our online participants by just looking through some of the amazing comments that have been put here. We have a comment from Dagi. Are we also creating our own cultural beliefs? For instance, why do most trans women prefer working in the hospitality industry? Is it a mindset or something? That calls for another whole panel session. Imelda Miera says, I think they look for spaces where I don't know the context in which that fits in. People use different verses from the Bible to justify their beliefs. That is Wanjiru, Morinda. Wendy says, I'm learning and grateful. It's also been an educative session, I see. So I want to appreciate our online participants. I also want to appreciate our panelists today, Africa, Kennedy Abbott, Ivy Werimba, Paulie Kapoor, and also want to thank myself for being here today to moderate this session. And also appreciation goes all the way to our amazing partner, ForumCiv, for having convened us here today to be able to have this talk. I'll allow a minute to each and every panelist to just say their last words, starting with Africa. Africa, if you can hear me, if you could give your last statement in like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for convening this space. It's really amazing. The conversations have been insightful. And let's keep on doing things like this constantly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That point is noted. Ivy.
Okay, so I'm also grateful for being a part of this, having this conversation. I've learned a lot from all of the panelists. And the thing that I can leave for the audience is stay open, learn as much as you can, question everything. At the end of the day, you are the one who makes the choice. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Kennedy Bot. You're on mute.
Okay. Multitasking. Yeah, thank you everyone for, it's about the time of the day. Yeah, so thank you everyone for listening in. Despite everything happening in the world, you found the time to join us virtually. I don't have much to say, but that you have rights, and if you're an ally, please just work with us more. We'll be able to tag you along into our space and tell you what to say and how to say it, and how to help us achieve our goal. For our communities, you have a right to be heard and you have a right to love. So just be you. And to that, Bonsoye, Obrigado. Over to you.
Wewe nawe na hizi manini jargons. Anyway, from my end, I want to appreciate all the panelists, all the participants who've followed through the conversation. We also want to appreciate ForumCiv for giving this necessary support to enable us convince this conversation. As I said before, this is just a series of the Kikao Junction that will still continue. The conversation will continue even beyond the one we've had today. We are joined by a very important person who is going to at least take the floor to just give us a closing remark. Just like I mentioned before, the Kikao Junction has been a series of week-long conversations, and I think we've been humbled to be the last panel to close the week. And we're also humbled to have the guest who's going to close this session with us. It's a blessing. So I'll hand it over to her. Allow me to use her as a pronoun. You'll let us know your pronouns later as you introduce yourself. So over to you, Catherine. You're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
You can hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. So, thank you so much, Akwanya. I'm like, yeah, you're blessing me and you've given me many names. But I thank you for the whole week. Yes, my pronoun is her. So yeah, that is it. But I thank the panelists. I thank you for the excellent moderation this week. I think it's been a very exciting week. And as we are concluding, I think we said with one of the people who've been following, saying it's been a week full of learning. So same for me, I think it's been learning. And I like what Kennedy has said, building allies. If we're allies, then we support and we create the spaces, and then you allow us to also come and take part in those spaces. So I think for me as ForumCiv, on behalf of ForumCiv, it's been a very exciting week for us, having these conversations, focusing on rights and how we're able to enhance and protect these rights within our communities. It's been a very vibrant week from yesterday and today, discussing very informative discussions and insights from a very good selection of panelists. I must say, I think the planning team did quite well, selecting a very good team of panelists who are well informed. And we also have had a very good audience that was able to follow these discussions and be able to ask very relevant questions as we seek, of course, to find a way to be able to promote inclusion and have very well-joined discussions. So the Wajibu, this session, the Kikao Junction, has been made possible by the Wajibu program, which supports, of course, as you all know, dynamic and innovative initiatives to pursue democracy and human rights and gender equality. So as Wajibu, we are very proud and we are keen on strengthening and enhancing dialogue and platforms, because we say in the Kikao Junction, we provide platforms for discussions, for to just talk about an array of issues and be able to find solutions and issues that are affecting us that sometimes look like they are very probably they've been taken care of, but again, they have not been fully enhanced. So I'm happy that through this Kikao Junction today and what happened yesterday, they've been able to provide such a platform for not only learning, but also for networking and for creating synergies, because I believe in these 2 days, we've learned a lot. We've been able to create synergies. We've interrogated, different issues, but I'm happy that the discussion. So for me, as we close the week, I think the 3 key takeaways that are coming is that organizing remains very crucial in realizing fundamental rights. If we don't organize at whatever level, then we are not able to really make any way forward and even be able to build a movement. So when I listened in the last 2 days, I think the key thing is that we have to build movements. And how do we build these movements? Then we really must be able to organize ourselves and organize objectively. And I think I've had that throughout, like, let's just not be able to just make noise, but be able to really organize very objectively. Again, another takeaway for me is the need to really strengthen and enhance open platforms for conversations and be very deliberate in inclusion and diversity, and bring on board not only the mainstream voices, but also be able to bring about marginalized voices, because that is very important. And I think that is one of the things that Kikao Junction has been able to do. We are very big on inclusivity, we are very big on diversity, and really going to and bring out voices probably that have not been heard before, so that we can be able to have a very good discussions. And then thirdly, I think, which I've seen in all of you, in the panelists the whole week, is the need to be bold. Because again, if you're not bold, if you're not courageous, then we'll not be able to really pursue the realization of these human rights. So it's important to still be bold, to be very courageous. But again, as we do that, as we are bold, as we are courageous, it's also important to be keen and be aware of the need to maintain our safety, and also the well-being of others is very important. So as we are bold, we are courageous. Again, we are aware of our surroundings and those that are that we work with. So I'm really happy for the discussions this week, and I'm looking forward to continuation of the Kikao Junction platforms. And above all, I think my takeaway message for all of us, the audience, the people who followed, is that we need to also take care of ourselves. I think we've talked about issues of mental health. We are in a very difficult time, different things happening around the pandemic and different issues going on, the economy, marginalization and all that. So let's take good care of ourselves spiritually, mentally, and even physically. So I want to thank you all. Thank you to our online audience. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you for our super moderators the whole week, and even for the planning team within ForumCiv. And at the end of the day, again, thank you to our back donor, who is the Embassy of Sweden, who's been funding us through the Wajibu program that has enabled us to bring the Kikao Junction to you. We have exciting platforms again coming in, so keep following us on our social media platforms, on YouTube, on Facebook, and even on our Twitter platform. So I want to thank you as I bring this session to an end and wish you all a good evening. God bless.